Hi everybody, and welcome back to Mike Norman Economics for another installment of our lesson series here, our video series. In the last video I talked about the concept that the government is the net supplier of savings to the non-governmental sector. That's me and you and everybody else in the private sector. It has to be that way. Whatever's on the governmental side of the ledger is the equal but opposite on the non-governmental side. If the government runs a deficit of, let's say, 500 billion, by definition, the non-governmental sector has experienced an increase in savings of 500 billion. Because, let's face it, to run a deficit, you have to put in more than you're taking back. So that additional input equates to higher income savings of the non-governmental sector. Now I bring this up again because today in the newspaper there was a lot of media coverage about a number of banks that have been granted by the government the right to pay back the TARP money. Now you remember the TARP money, that whole TARP program happened last year when those were the Treasury Troubled Asset Recovery Program. Banks had supposedly a lot of bad assets on their books, and the government was going to take those bad assets or take care of those bad assets, inject capital into the banks so that they are not burdened with those bad assets. But the thing that applies in this lesson is when I read some of this commentary and they talked about how, well, now the government is getting its money back and it's going to either be able to use that now for more spending or investment or stimulus, or it can use it to pay down the debt. Now this just makes me laugh, and anyone who has a grasp of my last lesson, that the government is the net supplier of savings to the non-governmental sector, will see how silly this all is. Because first of all, the TARP money was created by a mere keystroke on a computer. It's an electronic credit into the banking system. It is not as if the government went out somewhere and collected resources and then turned around as some middleman and then lent those resources out. No, the original TARP money, whatever that was, 700 billion, 750 billion, that was merely an electronic credit, a keystroke on a computer. It was created out of thin air. And the notion that the government all the while, during the time that this TARP money was lent out, that somehow the government was constrained in its ability to spend because it had lent out this money and it's waiting there, you know, on pins and needles, waiting till it gets back so that it could spend again. This is just a ridiculous, nonsensical notion. And the fact of the matter is, since the TARP money, we have seen a very significant increase in government spending. That TARP money outflow, if you want to call it that, that TARP money loan, if you want to call it that, did not constrain the government's ability to spend one iota. And the idea now that they've been waiting there patiently, sitting on pins and needles, and now the government's going to get it back and they will have the ability to spend some more, that is just absolutely ludicrous. But let's go to the next sort of idea which is being thrown about there in the media, that now, since the government is getting this money back from the banks that the government lent it to, now it can pay down the debt. Now the way to pay down the debt, or paying down the debt, as we know from the prior lesson, because you got on one side the ledger is the government, the other side of the ledger is the non-government. So we know that in order for the government, when it pays down the debt, let's say reduces that deficit is shrinking as opposed to increasing, that means, or we're moving more towards, less deficit, more towards surplus, that means the non-governmental sector, the private sector, that's me and you and everybody else, our deficit has to grow, or our savings. Another way to say that is the government is taking back some of our savings that were supplied as a result of its deficit spending, to shrink its. Now where does that go? Doesn't go anywhere. It was created out of thin air as an electronic accounting entry, and when it's taken away, it goes back into the black hole where it came from, which is nowhere. So it is a net drain on the private sector, this notion of paying back or reducing the debt. A better way to say that, if we only had some of our leaders who would understand this, a better way to say that, and I think if they said it the right way, they wouldn't be doing it, because you can say it in an equal fashion simply by stating paying down the debt. When the government pays down the debt, it equates to a reduction in savings and income to the non-governmental sector, the private sector. Is that what we want to do? Is that what we want to do in the middle of a recession? Doesn't seem like a good idea to me. So, but it's not surprising that you hear this coming from the media, because they do it all the time. Propagation of misinformation constantly. And the shame of this, I think the sad part about this is that all these ideas and concepts and these facts, yes, I'm going to use that word, these facts are readily available. But you know, there's an old saying, somebody said it, you know, learning takes effort. And effort is something that most people don't want to do, including the media. Well, that's it for this lesson today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. And as always, keep your comments coming. This is Mike Norman. See you next time. Bye-bye.